about the tension triangle and where it really fits into everything. So I'm going to hope that you watch the preview. If you didn't watch the previous video, go back and do it, because it kind of gives you a ground frame where we're going to go with this. This one's going to be kind of long because we're bringing a lot of different prospects and a lot of different ideas into this video. So hopefully you kind of watch the preview of those. Now, the language that we use to describe the tension triangle is going to be different depending on where it came from. So if it came from Investopedia, if it came from Coinbase, you're going to get kind of an industry viewpoint of it. If you're coming from academia, you're going to kind of get a real big psychological viewpoint in terms of belonging and oneness and how do we fit into the organization from a personal level. So when we're looking at industry, we're looking at efficiency and interest and governance and how do we run this company, how do we make this DAO work the way it needs to work in the best interest of all of the people that are involved in this. How do we make sure we're open enough that we can have trust and faith in our DAO, but keep any trade secrets that we have in place so that we don't have to worry about losing our competitive edge. Now, what's interesting on this one is academic-wise is more about the psychology of how a DAO works, right? Where does the individual voice fit in? How do I get heard in this organization, right? How does my belief system interact within the larger DAO construct? Do I have to have loyalty to the organization, or can I just kind of plan an exit strategy? So it's interesting because we're looking at bounds, those upper and lower bounds, both in loyalty, voice, and exit, to make sure that we have a process for letting people gracefully back away from the DAO if the DAO is not going in the direction they want it to go in. Now, realistically, it's all of the above, all of the academic and industry things all play in here because we have people, and humans are messy to begin with. Lots of competing reasons why we do the things we do, but then we have some pretty solid business practices that we need to be able to do. So sometimes people who are members of DAO really aren't there for an authentic reason. They're there for some other reason, and that can kind of hinder your DAO and where it goes. And sometimes that can really derail your DAO all the way through, right? So there's kind of the two different approaches, and I do kind of want to take a look at this, right? So we have our industry approach, again, which is decentralization, governance, openness, and all the other things that kind of go into that tension triangle. Now, when they put all this stuff together, they're kind of taking a look at where we can get problems, right? And one of the biggest ones is going to be what's called an agency problems, and that the principal-agent relationship between the governance body and the stakeholders never perfectly align with each other. So you may want to go out and you may want to buy this really super cool thing, and I don't want you to do that with my money, right? I want to invest my money my way. I'm a member of this DAO because you were going in a direction I wanted you to go in, but then all of a sudden you change over to something else. So, we want our customers to be happy, but they're going to be resistant to change. Maybe the DAO is going to change its focus from, Bored Ape Yacht Club to something else, right? Some other NFT. We don't want that change. We love Bored Ape Yacht Club, but we don't want to do the other one. So it depends on where this goes. And what makes the DAO different here is now you're going to have everyone having a voice. And you're going to build political coalitions or voting blocks within that problem. And there's where your agency problem comes in, because not everyone's going to agree that you all need to go out and buy another 100 Bored Ape Yacht Club NFTs, right? So it's good in that we can keep an eye on how, company level decisions making. And so, if we do things that are crazy and we have an opportunity to exit gracefully. But again, it's that idea of how do we do these things so that we can make sure that everything is running in such a way that we don't have that agency problem. And that's a tough nut to crack with a DAO, especially on an investment DAO or something where you're expecting a profit. Someone may see a huge profit-making opportunity that is off the DAO's charter and throw a proposal, hey, let's go off our charter and go do this because I think this is a big money-making proposition. If they can't get enough of a coalition together, that action won't happen with that DAO. It doesn't mean they can't go up and stand up their own DAO and do this, but it means that idea between, hey, we're doing this, but let's go do this because I think this is a better moneymaker, may not actually happen within the organization itself. So there's a cost to making the decisions quickly. So here's the problem, right? When you're decentralized, voting can take too long. Some voting polls are like 24 hours, some are 72 hours. In computer time and in computer speed, 24-hour is an eon. 72 hours is a crazy amount of time, right? Especially if you have something going on that's an emergency, like someone figured out a way to loot the treasury. Maybe there's a big mood swings in the value of a cryptocurrency that you've pegged your governance token to. And again, we've seen how Bitcoin and Ethereum and others have these wild moves back and forth. I've seen this as much by 12% overnight. If you're doing a pegged cryptocurrency, your entire DAO's value in that cryptocurrency can decrease by 12% overnight. It can cost a DAO millions. So maybe you want to move away from that peg. Maybe you want to do something. Maybe you want to peg it to something else. Yeah, that can be kind of an emergency, right? Because you have a fund of money, but it has a value. And if you peg it to something else, that can be a problem. If someone's looting your treasury because they found a hole in the code, you have to be able to respond immediately to be efficient. And if you have a big voting model that takes 24, 72 hours, your money's gone within minutes anyways. So it's not efficient, and it costs the DAO a lot of money or even trust in the system. And once the trust is lost in the DAO basically is going to go under. So you really need to have that 2 tiers. Now, the problem with the 2 tiers, people who can respond to emergencies, and then the people that vote on the day-to-day operations of the thing, really kind of set up 2 different camps. And we go back to our agency problem, right? Where the day-to-day group and the emergency action group, those goals are not going to align. And you throw in an expert in there, the person who wrote the code or whatever, and now you've got a lot of other issues that are all human-driven, not necessarily technology driven. And we end up with some governance and stakeholder interests, right? So interesting problem, especially where money's involved. Money makes people do some of the craziest darn things that you will ever see in this lifetime, right? And while generally we're going to vote, it's going to be open to voting. We've got a good voting platform, voting software. We've got it all set up. All right, there are going to be roadblocks in the way, especially if you've set it up so that if you're going to spend money from the treasury, more than one person needs to approve the sale. So what happens if you go and you buy another 100 Bored Ape Yacht Club and the other person wanted to buy something else, and the person that signs those is on vacation and there's no way of getting hold of them? If you're in an auction situation, you'll lose your window if you take too long to pay the auction, and it will go to the second person that's involved, right? So there's an interesting conflict right there, which could happen, especially if you have it set up to protect the treasury from being looted, right, by doing multi-sig authorization, which makes sense. Well, that multi-sig authorization, if someone's out of position or out of availability, can literally change the direction of that DAO overnight. So again, it's kind of interesting how this works, but believe it or not, things like this have happened. And that's what makes this interesting, right? So the other thing that makes this interesting too is that voting block issue. Right, humans by nature really tend to be a little bit more political than we want to let on, right? We tend to vote in coalitions, we form friendships, we form voting blocks. We have blocks within the overarching DAO that's trying to jockey for where we want the DAO to go. And sometimes those influence groups are going to be like way too successful and take the DAO away from its original intentions. So, right, there's no evidence anywhere that I have seen yet that a group decision is smarter than a single decision maker, right? You get more input on a group, but sometimes that decision maker is actually really quite brilliant. So good decisions are going to get made. Bad decisions are going to get made. People are going to make money. People are going to lose money. And that will cause problems, especially with governance, especially with a lot of the shareholder interest. No one goes into an investment vehicle to lose money, right? And if you have someone in a position of power over that DAO that can kind of gum up the works, whether it's a coalition or a block or whether it's an individual person, you get some really big tension going on in that organization. And then finally, openness versus security, right? DAOs are on the blockchain. They're smart contracts on the blockchain. I can read your code. I can know everything about your code. I can follow it through. I can audit it. I can do all the things. Anyone can find a flaw in that code, and if I find a flaw, then I can find a way to abuse the DAO. It's pretty straightforward. It's not rocket science. It's done almost every week at this point, right? But what's really interesting, though, is that you kind of have that dichotomy between open source, it's great, wonderful, and it is, or closed source. Then no, I have to keep my code not available to other people because someone may hack it. So you're going to have that dichotomy on openness, especially when it comes to code. Not so much in the DAO realm because everyone's kind of steeped in that openness kind of idea, but you're going to be running into some things that are going to have to be closed, right? You're going to have off-chain data that is not necessarily going to be available to anybody to review. So you need to be ready for that. You need to be ready to answer those questions about that when it comes to that idea of openness, right? And then the other one, security, again, for some, it's a great decision. Every transaction is open on the blockchain, but I am absolutely convinced, and my next course is going to be on chain analysis, how to track the money through the chain, right? It's actually really straightforward. It's one of the greatest sources of open source intel for financial data ever invented by mankind, and anyone can get to it. And then that makes it for others not so much. So they're going to run their stuff through a third-party blender, right? Like Tornado Cash or Blender.io. So chain analysis doesn't really work that well when you have something that can do things like that. You even have a full-on protocol using the P2P network to move money around between network users, so that openness for that transactions can be obfuscated. Now, if the DAO is busy doing that, well, of course, we're a big open source happy family here with an open, transparent blockchain. The first question is going to be out of most investors' mouths are, what are you trying to hide? So again, that dichotomy, openness versus security, because again, you have to keep some things private. Now, academic is a little bit more interesting from my viewpoint because it deals with people, and people are like super messy when it comes to how we interact, how we interrelate with each other, and even how we behave. And money is horrible when it comes to this, right? So the big issue here, right, is that you're going to create an instability in the DAO if there are big different in viewpoints or views or direction or guidance or anything else between members of the DAO. It is not unreasonable for members of the DAO to abjectly hate each other and can become violent, right, to each other, over the wires, screaming at each other, calling each other bad names, trolling each other, sending things to their house that they didn't order, and so on. Right, so there can be unstable processes between various voting factions. There are different tiers of ownership and groups, and sometimes that becomes so horribly enmeshed and entangled that you'll never get a good passing vote. There's no way to break that blockade of what's going on in the DAO. So people will feel like they've been silenced even though they own tokens, and the DAO becomes basically non-functional because these groups are infighting all the time. The big problem is when this falls into a single voice or single voting block that constantly wins all the time, that disenfranchises other members of the DAO. Big deal, right? If you have a group of people that have a consistent voting block that is 50.1% that are always running the DAO, after a while, people just drop out. They stop voting. There's no point in voting. My voice will not be heard, interestingly enough. So now you get to loyalty to the organization. Now, in general, people are going to join your DAO because they like what you're going to do. They like where you believe. They like where you're coming from. They like the purpose. And as long as that perception is in place that people are working on that mission or that goal or whatever it is, the reason they join that DAO, then people will feel loyal to the organization. You're doing something I believe in. You're helping kids get the eye surgery that they need to get, or you're helping people with cleft palates, you're helping the mercy ships or Doctors Without Borders. These are all really good things. Now, when that loyalty is tested and fails, people will feel less loyal, and we see that every day, right? Especially in business right now, especially with all the things that are going on. When that loyalty is tested and it fails, I've been loyal to you, you need to be loyal to me. They're going to feel less loyal. They'll probably even seek an exit from the DAO. And I can't say as I really blame them, right? If it no longer meets the purpose for why you joined, it's time to go. But you now have issues around trust, and you have betrayal issues, and you have issues about being used, and they just used me for my money, or they used me for my time. They didn't really live up to whatever their mission, vision, and goal statement was. That's a problem, because now you have someone internal to the DAO that can actively and probably will undermine bits and pieces of that process. They'll build a new coalition. They'll do something to gum up the works. They may even vote against all proposals, right? So on that individual voice, one group can't win all the time. Members need to believe that their voices are heard, and that in that decentralized environment, they may not be possible because there's a big coalition or a big group or a voting bloc that consistently leads in that DAO. Now, this could lead to confrontation within the DAO itself. You could have some really bad language in the internal forums or internal discussion, and it could include a rift where that whole DAO rips apart. People want to exit, people want out because it no longer suits their internal needs for why they're there. Now, every human structure has a dominance hierarchy. If you've never heard of that, go back and read Koski, Z, and Olson, right, from 2015. Fascinating paper on what a dominance hierarchy is, and so it is true in a DAO, right? It's nearly impossible to be that way, but we by nature are going to do this anyways, right? We are going to have a clear leader. We're going to have a clear group of people that are leading. We're going to have a clear blocks. We're going to have clear political organization, right? So they're going to work towards their needs and their access to resources over everybody else. And it happens in business, it happens in the commercial sector, it happens in the nonprofit sector, it will happen in a DAO, and it does. So just be really prepared for this, right? If you're running one, think through the psychology of this. I know that sounds kind of weird to be thinking, oh, it's just a company and we're just going to go buy NFTs. No, there's a psychology. Some people may not like this and they want that. Some people may hate Bored Ape Yacht Club and love CryptoKitties, or they want to buy CryptoKitties and do whatever you do with CryptoKitties to make better CryptoKitties, and you can't do that with Bored Ape Yachts. Whatever. It's a thing. Just be really prepared for that, because the next bit is exit. There has to be a way to allow people to exit whole from the DAO, so they're not worse off for being in the DAO. They didn't lose money. So people who are feeling like they're never listened to, in a constant state of flux, they feel like they're arguing all the time. They're no longer getting that personal Maslow's hierarchy need going on here. People that constantly fail in the voting process, they're going to want to exit. Your big goal as the owner of a DAO is have an exit strategy, so the people who feel disenfranchised can actually just leave and take their money and go someplace else. Now, one of the things I think is interesting, one of the big ideas that keeps on coming out of the literature, is that you have a prorated exit process. So I may have come in and I may have given $100 and I bought $100 worth of governance tokens. Right now that governance token is worth $200, so I need to be able to pay that $200 to the person that wants to leave. But if you are about to make a big purchase or something else, you can prorate that out, right? Say, okay, I'll give you your 100 now, but we have this big purchase that's coming up and we need to keep everything together, so I'll give you a prorate of whatever profit we show off of that. They may go for it, they may not, but it really does seem like a prorated exit process to include the profits that have been made will actually help a lot in building back some kind of trust. Because generally the only reason why they're going to want to go is because they no longer trust anybody. Then there's a special category, and I love this one. It's called expertise. People need to be aware of what's going on in the DAO, especially if it's an investment collector or someone that's going to make a profit, a value kind of oriented DAO. So that takes time, and that takes people away from jobs. And that means they need to be paid for their time, and they have to have the ability to move on a moment's notice if something bad is happening or if something is changing in the market too fast. So this takes that time away from other things. Now, you have expertise in there, and then you have other people that are in the DAO that may be non-informed, that may be partially or maybe extraordinarily well performed and disagree with the expertise, that group of people that can run the show or get paid by the DAO to do work. If you have low-informed voters in the DAO and the expertise is saying we need to buy Bored Ape because it's really super cool, but the other person wants to buy CryptoKitties, which is part of a video game, then they're not going to understand because they're not informed. They don't understand the difference. They just see what they want to do, and they'll buck heads with that expertise. If you have someone and you're doing an investment DAO and you decide you want to buy 100 shares of NVIDIA, and someone is saying, oh, wait, let's go buy 100 shares of Intel on top of it, well, that may be a good idea, especially if they're well informed and they understand where you're going to go with this. But for non-informed voters, they're like, well, what's the difference between NVIDIA and Intel? Why should I buy both? So expertise has to work on trying to inform or partially inform people to bring them into well-informed, if they will even listen to you, right? Things have to be that transparent. This is what we want to buy. This is why we want to buy it. This is why we think it's really cool. This is the historical transactions. Non-informed voters may just sit there and click no. They don't care. They just don't want to do this anymore. They want out, or they have their problems, or they just don't want to be informed. And that happens. People sometimes just simply don't want to deal with it anymore. They just go make me money. I don't want to vote anymore, right? And that's one of the reasons why we have managed funds. So big problem when you're dealing with expertise. Make sure your experts have a way of trying to bring people back into the fold. So I know this has been like really super long, but really be really aware of what the classic industry viewpoint of the tension triangle is, as well as the academic viewpoint on the tension triangle. A lot of this is psychological. A lot of this has to do with how you operate and why you operate the way you do. But be really ready to address these things, because if you run into these problems and you let this get out of control as the owner or manager of a DAO, man, it will just rip itself apart eventually. Right? The effectiveness of the DAO itself and its reason for existence can be legitimately called into question. But just be really aware of both industry and academic, because if you do address these things and you have them in your bylaws as part of your prospectus, it's just going to make your DAO stronger, especially that exit session. Here's how we do exiting. If you got to get out and you want to get out of the DAO, here's how we're going to gracefully exit you out, and we're going to thank you for your time and getting there. So that's essentially the tension triangle, both the industry side and the academic side. So that's it for this section, and you have a quiz. So I will see you there.